The sheriff's hand clamped down on Cole Archer's shoulder like a vice, dragging the towering cowboy toward the line of trembling women in the town square. "Pick one," he snarled, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Or I'll pick for you." Cole's jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the desperate faces before him until they landed on her. Ruby Miller. The girl everyone called the burden. The one they'd bet money would go home unchosen, unwanted, unloved. And in that moment, with the whole town holding its breath, Cole Archer did the one thing no one expected. He smiled. "Her," he said, pointing directly at Ruby. "I choose her." The crowd erupted, but not in celebration. What happened next would shatter everything this cruel town believed about worth, beauty, and what it means to be chosen. If you want to know how a single choice can destroy shame and build an unbreakable love, stay with me until the very end, and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Ruby's story travels across this world. The morning Ruby Miller woke to her mother's disgust, she knew it would be a day like all the others, painful, humiliating, and endless. "Get up, girl." Constance Miller's voice sliced through the dawn like a blade. "Sun's been up an hour, and you're still wallowing in that bed like a beached whale." Ruby's eyes opened slowly, her body aching before she even moved. The wooden slats of her narrow bed creaked beneath her weight as she sat up, pulling the thin quilt around her shoulders. Through the gap in the curtains, pale light filtered into the cramped room she shared with her two younger sisters, both of whom had already dressed and disappeared downstairs. "I said move." Her mother's shadow filled the doorway, arms crossed, lips pursed in that expression Ruby knew too well, the look that said, "You are my greatest disappointment." "Yes, Mama." Ruby's voice came out small, apologetic, as it always did. She dressed quickly in the dim room, pulling on the same faded blue dress she wore most days. It was too tight across her middle, too short at the ankles, but it was the only one that still fit. Her mother refused to waste fabric on her, saying it would be like throwing good cloth into a fire, pointless and expensive. When Ruby descended the narrow stairs, her sisters, Naomi and Esther, were already seated at the breakfast table, their delicate hands folded primly in their laps. They were everything Ruby wasn't: slender, graceful, with narrow waists and faces that drew admiring glances from the young men in town. Constance doted on them, brushed their hair with gentle hands, spoke to them with warmth that Ruby had long since stopped hoping for. "You'll fetch the water this morning," her mother said without looking at her, spooning porridge into the girls' bowls. "And stop by the Yoder farm for vegetables. Don't dawdle. Don't embarrass me." Ruby nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, Mama." She took her bowl, always smaller than her sister's, though her mother claimed it was for her own good, and ate standing by the door, too ashamed to sit at the table where she didn't fit, where the chair groaned too loudly, where her presence seemed to suck the joy out of the room. When she finished, she took the wooden bucket and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The town of Birchwood was already stirring. Horses pulled wagons down the dirt main street. Women in long dresses and bonnets gathered near the mercantile, their voices low and judgmental. Men tipped their hats and greeted each other with firm handshakes and talk of harvest and weather. Ruby kept her head down and walked quickly toward the well at the edge of town, her heavy boots kicking up dust with every step. She could feel the stares following her, hear the whispers that never quite stayed whispered. "That's the Miller girl, isn't it? Poor thing, built like a barn. No man will ever look at her twice." Ruby's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. She'd learned long ago that fighting back only made it worse. Better to be silent. Better to be invisible. At the well, she lowered the bucket and began cranking the handle, the rope groaning as it descended into the darkness below. The water was cold and clear when it came up, sloshing over the rim as she set the bucket down to rest her aching arms. "Well, well, well, if it ain't the Miller elephant." Ruby's stomach twisted. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Jacob Stoltzfus and his pack of friends, boys her age who found endless amusement in her suffering. "Leave me alone, Jacob," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the bucket. "Oh, don't be like that, Ruby." Jacob sauntered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "We're just being friendly. Ain't we, boys?" The others laughed, a cruel braying sound that made Ruby's hand shake as she gripped the bucket handle. "I heard your mama's trying to marry you off," Jacob continued, circling her like a predator. But I reckon even the ugliest farmer in 3 counties wouldn't take you, not even if your pa offered him the whole farm. My pa's been dead 5 years, Ruby said, her voice barely above a whisper. Probably died of shame, one of the other boys called out, and they all laughed again. Ruby's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. She hefted the bucket, heavier now, full of water, and turned to leave. Jacob stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Where you going? We ain't done talking to you." "Please," Ruby said, her voice breaking. "I just need to get home. Say I'm a fat pig and we'll let you pass." Ruby's breath hitched. The bucket trembled in her hands, water sloshing over the sides and soaking the front of her dress. "Come on, Ruby, say it. I'm a fat pig." The other boys took up the chant, their voices rising, drawing the attention of passers-by who either looked away quickly or stopped to watch with thinly veiled amusement. Ruby's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. She was frozen in that terrible moment, surrounded by laughter and cruelty and the weight of a life she'd never asked for. Then a voice, deep, firm, and utterly calm, cut through the noise. "Step aside." The laughter died instantly. Jacob and his friends turned, their swagger evaporating as a man on horseback approached. He was tall, taller than any man Ruby had ever seen, with broad shoulders and a weathered face half shadowed by the brim of a dusty black hat. His clothes were trail-worn, his boots scuffed, and a rifle rested across his saddle. He looked like he'd ridden straight out of the wild, untouched by the rules and propriety of Birchwood. "This ain't your business, stranger," Jacob said, though his voice had lost its edge. The man's eyes, dark and unreadable, shifted to Jacob, then to Ruby, then back. "You're blocking the lady's way." "Lady?" Jacob snorted. "That ain't no lady. That's—" "I wasn't asking." The man's hand moved casually to rest on the rifle, and Jacob's words died in his throat. The boys scattered like startled chickens, muttering curses under their breath but unwilling to test the stranger's patience. Ruby stood frozen, clutching the bucket, unsure if she should thank him or run. The man tipped his hat slightly. "You all right, miss?" She nodded quickly, not trusting her voice. He studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, then urged his horse forward, riding past her toward the center of town without another word. Ruby watched him go, her heart pounding, her hands still trembling. She didn't know who he was or why he'd helped her. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had stood between her and the cruelty of the world. She didn't know that man's name was Cole Archer, and she didn't know that in less than an hour, he would change her life forever. Ruby hurried home with the water, her dress still damp, her mind spinning. She set the bucket down inside the door and was immediately sent back out again by her mother, this time to the Yoder farm for vegetables. "And don't you dare come back without potatoes," Constance snapped. "Last time you forgot them, we had nothing for supper." "I didn't forget," Ruby said quietly. "They didn't have any." "Then you should have gone to another farm. Don't make excuses." Ruby nodded and left again, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion she couldn't shake. The walk to the Yoder farm took 20 minutes through open fields and past neat rows of crops. When she arrived, Mrs. Yoder greeted her with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ruby Miller, what brings you here?" "My mama needs vegetables, ma'am. Potatoes, carrots, anything you can spare." Mrs. Yoder looked her up and down, her gaze lingering on Ruby's rounded figure with barely concealed disdain. "I suppose I can find something." She returned with a small basket, far less than Ruby had hoped for, and named a price that was twice what she'd charge anyone else. Ruby paid without protest, knowing that arguing would only make her mother angrier. As she turned to leave, Mrs. Yoder called after her. "You heard about the gathering this afternoon?" Ruby stopped. "What gathering?" "The sheriff's called all the unmarried women to the square. Some new law about marriage. Every woman of age has to come." Mrs. Yoder's smile turned cruel. "Even you." Ruby's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out soon enough. Best get home and make yourself presentable, though I don't suppose it'll make much difference." Ruby walked home in a daze, the basket heavy in her arms, her mind racing. A gathering for unmarried women? A law about marriage? What could it possibly mean? When she reached home, her mother was already in a frenzy, pulling out Naomi and Esther's best dresses, pinning their hair, fussing over every detail. "Mama, what's happening?" Ruby asked. Constance didn't look at her. "The sheriff's choosing brides for the unmarried men in town. Every woman has to go to the square and stand in line. The men will choose who they want." Ruby's blood turned to ice. "Choose?" "Yes, choose. Like picking apples from a tree." Constance's eyes finally landed on Ruby, cold and dismissive. "Though I doubt anyone will pick you. You'll stand there and be passed over, and the whole town will see what I've had to live with all these years." "Mama, please, go put on your dress, the gray one, and for heaven's sake, try not to look like a cow." Ruby fled to her room, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She changed into the gray dress, shapeless, drab, the color of ash, and stared at herself in the cracked mirror above the wash basin. She saw what everyone else saw: a wide face, thick arms, a body that took up too much space, that bent chairs and drew stares and made people laugh. "No one will choose you," she thought, and maybe that's for the best. Maybe being alone is better than being someone's joke. But even as she thought it, a small, traitorous part of her heart whispered, "What if someone did?" She shook her head, banishing the thought. Hope was dangerous. Hope only led to deeper pain. At 2 o'clock, the entire Miller family walked to the town square. Naomi and Esther walked ahead with their mother, their dresses fluttering in the breeze, their faces bright with excitement. Ruby trailed behind, her eyes on the ground, wishing she could disappear. When they arrived, the square was already crowded. Women lined up along one side, young, old, desperate, hopeful. Men stood on the other, some eager, some reluctant, all watching with varying degrees of interest. And in the center, standing on a wooden platform, was Sheriff William Harding, a man known for his iron fist and his love of control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice booming across the square. "As you know, the territory has passed a new law to encourage settlement and family building. Every unmarried woman of age must be present today. Every unmarried man must choose a bride before the sun sets." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some excited, some anxious. "Now," the sheriff continued, "we'll begin with the men. Step forward if you're ready to choose." A few men shuffled forward, glancing nervously at the line of women. But then the sheriff's gaze landed on someone at the edge of the square, and his expression hardened. "You there, stranger." Ruby followed his gaze, and her breath caught. It was him. The man from the well, the one who'd stood up to Jacob and his friends. He stood apart from the crowd, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You're unmarried, aren't you?" the sheriff demanded. The man didn't answer. "That means you have to choose. It's the law." The stranger's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to get married. Don't care why you came. You're here now, and you'll follow the law like everyone else. Step forward and pick a woman." The crowd watched in tense silence as the stranger, Cole Archer, Ruby would later learn, stood his ground. "I'm not picking anyone." The sheriff's face flushed red. "You defying me, boy?" "I'm not defying anything. I'm just not interested." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, and then, slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze toward the line of women. His eyes landed on Ruby, and he smiled. "Fine," the sheriff said, his voice dripping with mockery. "If you won't choose, I'll help you. I'll make it easy. You can have her." He pointed directly at Ruby. The crowd erupted in laughter. Ruby felt her face burn, her chest tighten, her entire body scream to run, to hide, to vanish from existence. "Come on, stranger," the sheriff taunted. "She's the only one left nobody wants. Take her, or I'll fine you for breaking the law." Cole's eyes shifted to Ruby, and for a long, agonizing moment, the world held its breath. Then he spoke, his voice calm, steady, and impossibly clear. "Her," he said. "I choose her." The laughter stopped, the square fell silent, and Ruby Miller's life shattered and reformed in the space of a single heartbeat. Ruby couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. What? The sheriff's smile faltered. I said, I choose her. Cole's gaze never left Ruby's face. The crowd exploded. He's joking. He can't be serious. Why would he choose her? Ruby's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as if she'd just witnessed something unspeakable. Naomi and Esther stared in horror. Jacob Stoltzfus and his friends howled with laughter, doubling over, slapping each other's backs. Poor bastard, one of them shouted. He's stuck with the fat girl. Ruby's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stay upright. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Why? She wanted to scream. Why would you do this to me? Why would you make me the joke again? But Cole didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't look at her with pity or disgust or amusement. He simply stepped forward, his boots heavy on the dirt, and stopped in front of her. What's your name? He asked quietly, his voice meant only for her. Ruby, she stammered, her voice barely audible. He nodded once. Ruby, I'm Cole. And then he did something that made the entire town gasp. He held out his hand to her, not as a joke, not as a performance, but as an offer, an invitation. Ruby stared at his hand, calloused, strong, steady, and then at his face. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't mocking her. He was waiting. Slowly, trembling, Ruby placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and it didn't flinch. Come on, Cole said, his voice low. Let's go. And with the entire town watching, jeering, whispering, laughing, Cole Archer led Ruby Miller through the square, past her horrified mother, past her sneering sisters, past Jacob and his friends and every person who'd ever made her feel small. Ruby walked beside him, her hand still in his, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't know why he'd chosen her. But for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and said, I choose you. And that was enough to keep her walking, even as the laughter followed them, even as the shame threatened to drown her. She kept walking, because Cole Archer's hand never let go. The wagon ride out of town felt like the longest journey of Ruby's life, though Cole's ranch sat only 5 miles beyond the last fence post of Birchwood. She sat rigid on the wooden bench beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon as the town disappeared behind them. The silence between them stretched taut as a rope, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves on the dirt road. Ruby's mind raced with questions she didn't dare ask. Why did you choose me? What do you want from me? When will you realize you've made a terrible mistake? But the words stuck in her throat, trapped beneath years of learning that speaking only invited more pain. Cole said nothing either, his hands loose on the reins, his gaze steady on the road ahead. His silence wasn't cruel like her mother's, or mocking like the town's. It was simply silence. As if he had nothing to prove and no need to fill the air with empty words. After nearly an hour, Ruby couldn't bear it anymore. You didn't have to do that, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rattle of the wagon. Cole glanced at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. Do what? Choose me. You could have refused. You could have left town. You didn't have to— Her voice broke. You didn't have to ruin your life. For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Then he pulled the wagon to a stop, setting the brake and turning to face her fully. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to shrink away, but she forced herself to hold still. You think I ruined my life? He asked, his tone neither angry nor amused. Ruby's throat tightened. Everyone else does. I don't care what everyone else thinks. He said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, that Ruby almost believed him. I needed a wife. You needed a way out. Seemed like a fair trade to me. The word should have stung. A fair trade, as if she were livestock or a bag of flour. But somehow they didn't. There was no cruelty in his voice, no hidden mockery. Just simple, brutal honesty. I don't know how to be a wife, Ruby admitted, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know how to cook properly or keep house or anything you'll need. Then you'll learn. Cole picked up the reins again and urged the horse forward. We'll figure it out as we go. Ruby wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she'd tried to learn, that her mother had given up on teaching her anything because it's pointless to waste time on someone who'll never amount to anything. But the words wouldn't come. So she sat in silence as the landscape shifted from rolling farmland to wilder terrain, rocky outcroppings, stands of pine trees, open meadows where deer grazed in the late afternoon light. When they finally crested a small rise, Ruby saw it, a ranch house nestled in a shallow valley, with a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral where several horses grazed. It was modest but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful attention. Nothing like the cramped, bitter house she'd left behind. "This is it," Cole said, pulling the wagon up to the house. "It's not much, but it's home." He climbed down and came around to her side, holding out his hand to help her down. Ruby hesitated. She'd learned long ago that accepting help often led to dropped hands and laughter when she proved too heavy, but Cole's expression remained patient, expectant. She placed her hand in his and stepped down. The wagon didn't groan in relief. Cole didn't grunt with effort. He simply helped her down as if she were any other woman, then released her hand and moved to unhitch the horse. Ruby stood uncertainly in the yard, clutching her small bundle of belongings: a spare dress, a worn Bible, and the wooden hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything she owned in the world fit in a bundle smaller than a loaf of bread. "Go on inside," Cole called over his shoulder as he led the horse toward the barn. "I'll be in shortly. There's bread and cheese in the pantry if you're hungry." Ruby climbed the 3 steps to the porch, her hand trembling as she pushed open the door. The interior was dim and cool, smelling faintly of wood smoke and coffee. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a wood stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a pair of worn armchairs near the fireplace. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder against one wall climbed to a loft. Everything was clean but sparse. No curtains softened the windows. No rugs warmed the floor. No photographs or paintings decorated the walls. It was a house built for function, not comfort. A place where a man lived alone and saw no reason to make it anything more. Ruby set her bundle on the table and moved to the pantry, finding half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a wedge of cheese covered with wax. Her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since the small bowl of porridge that morning, but guilt twisted in her chest. This was his food, his home. She had no right to take anything without asking. She was still standing there, paralyzed by indecision, when Cole came through the door. "You didn't eat," he observed, moving to the water pump by the sink and washing his hands. "I wasn't sure. I thought I should wait." "This is your house now too, Ruby? You don't need permission to eat." He dried his hands on a towel and cut 2 thick slices of bread, adding generous portions of cheese to each. He handed one to her and took a bite of his own, leaning against the counter. Ruby ate slowly, each bite feeling like both a gift and a theft. The bread was good, dense and hearty, and the cheese was sharp and flavorful. Real food, not the watery porridge and day-old scraps her mother had fed her. "You'll sleep in the bedroom," Cole said when they'd finished. "I'll take the loft." Ruby's head snapped up. "But that's your room. I can't." "You're my wife. You get the bedroom." His tone left no room for argument. "I've slept in worse places than a loft. It's fine." "I don't understand." The words burst out before Ruby could stop them. "Why are you being kind to me?" Cole set his plate in the sink and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "You think kindness needs a reason?" "In my experience, it does." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Your experience has been cruel, then." Ruby's vision blurred with sudden tears. She blinked them back furiously, angry at herself for this weakness, for this pathetic gratitude at being treated like a human being. Cole moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "Get some rest, Ruby. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I'll teach you what you need to know, but for tonight, just sleep." He disappeared into the darkness outside, and Ruby heard his boots on the ladder to the loft. She stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with confusion and disbelief. She moved to the bedroom door and pushed it open. The room was small and plain, with a sturdy bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. A single window looked out over the darkening valley. Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, half expecting it to collapse beneath her weight. It didn't. The mattress was firm and the quilt smelled clean, like sun and wind. She lay down fully clothed, too afraid to undress, too exhausted to care. For the first time in her life, Ruby Miller fell asleep without the sound of her mother's disgust or her sister's whispers. She fell asleep in silence, in a house that didn't hate her, on a bed that didn't groan beneath her weight. And for just that one night, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, Cole Archer had told the truth. Maybe this wasn't a joke. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe she really did belong here. The rooster's crow woke Ruby before dawn, a sound so foreign to her town-bred ears that she bolted upright in confusion before remembering where she was. Pale gray light filtered through the window, and somewhere outside she heard the sound of an axe striking wood in steady, rhythmic blows. She rose quickly, splashing cold water on her face from the basin and smoothing her dress as best she could. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room empty, but smelled fresh coffee brewing on the stove. A note lay on the table in rough, blocky handwriting. "Coffee's hot. Come to the barn when you're ready." Ruby poured herself a cup, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the heavy pot, and drank it standing by the window, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her from the inside out. When she finished, she set the cup in the sink and made her way outside. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She found Cole in the barn, forking hay into the stalls where 3 horses nickered softly in greeting. "Morning," he said without looking up. "You sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." Ruby hovered in the doorway, unsure what to do with her hands. What do you need me to do?" Cole paused, leaning on the pitchfork. "You ever worked with animals before?" "No. My mother said I'd just hurt them. Or myself." Something dark flashed across Cole's face, but he quickly smoothed it away. "Well, your mother was wrong. Come here." He led her to the chicken coop, a sturdy structure with a dozen hens pecking contentedly at the ground. Cole opened the door and gestured for Ruby to follow him inside. "Chickens are easy," he said, pulling a tin bucket from a hook on the wall. "You scatter feed in the morning, collect eggs in the afternoon, and make sure their water's clean. They'll complain no matter what you do, but they're harmless." He demonstrated, tossing handfuls of grain in wide arcs, while the chickens flocked around his feet, clucking and jostling each other. Then he handed the bucket to Ruby. She took it hesitantly, the weight of it unfamiliar in her hands. "What if I do it wrong?" "Ruby," Cole's voice was patient but firm, "there's no wrong way to feed chickens. Just throw the grain. They'll figure it out." Ruby dipped her hand into the bucket, grabbed a handful of grain, and tossed it awkwardly. It landed in a clump at her feet, and the chickens swarmed over it immediately, pecking furiously at each other in their eagerness to eat. "See?" Cole said. "They don't care if you're graceful. They just care that you feed them." Ruby threw another handful, then another, growing slightly more confident with each toss. By the time the bucket was empty, she was almost smiling. "Good," Cole said. "Now, let's collect eggs." He showed her how to reach carefully into the nesting boxes, how to tell if an egg was fresh by its weight and warmth, how to place them gently in the basket so they wouldn't crack. Ruby worked slowly, terrified of breaking something or getting pecked, but Cole never rushed her, never criticized. When they finished, they had 14 eggs, more than Ruby had ever gathered in her life. "We'll have these for breakfast," Cole said, carrying the basket toward the house. "Can you cook eggs?" Ruby's stomach sank. I've tried. They usually burn. Then we'll figure it out together." Cole handed her the basket and moved to the stove, stoking the fire and setting a cast-iron skillet on the heat. "Watch first, then you try." He cracked 4 eggs into the pan with practiced ease, added a pinch of salt, and scrambled them with a wooden spoon. The eggs cooked quickly, turning fluffy and golden, and he divided them onto 2 plates. "Your turn," he said, cracking 2 more eggs and handing Ruby the spoon. Her hand shook as she took it. The eggs sizzled in the pan and she stirred them frantically, terrified they'd stick or burn or somehow prove her mother right about her incompetence. "Slower," Cole said quietly, his hand covering hers on the spoon, guiding it in smooth, circular motions. "You're in control, not the eggs. Slow and steady." Ruby's breath caught at the contact, at the warmth of his hand over hers, at the strange intimacy of the moment. But Cole's touch wasn't inappropriate or demanding. It was simply instructive, guiding her until she found the rhythm. When the eggs were done, they were slightly overcooked but edible. Cole ate his portion without complaint, nodding in approval. "Better than mine the first time I tried," he said. "Practice makes perfect." Ruby ate her eggs in silence, overwhelmed by the simple act of sitting at a table with someone who didn't criticize every bite she took, who didn't count her food or comment on her portions. After breakfast, Cole taught her how to mend a broken fence post, how to pump water from the well without splashing it everywhere, how to tell which weeds to pull from the vegetable garden behind the house. Each task was new and difficult, and Ruby made countless mistakes, dropping tools, tripping over roots, tangling the rope when she tried to secure the horse. But Cole never laughed, never sighed in exasperation, never told her she was hopeless. He simply showed her again, and again, and again. By midday, Ruby was exhausted, her hands blistered and her back aching. Cole noticed her struggling and called a halt. "That's enough for today," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Go rest. I'll finish up here." "But I need to—" "Ruby." He looked at her steadily. "You've done good work today. Don't push yourself too hard. There's always tomorrow." Ruby nodded, too tired to argue, and retreated to the house. She collapsed in one of the armchairs by the fireplace, her body screaming in protest. She'd never worked so hard in her life, but she'd also never felt so useful. When Cole came in an hour later, he found her asleep in the chair, her head tilted at an awkward angle, her hands still bearing the dirt and calluses of the day's labor. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying her face, the way exhaustion had softened the lines of fear and shame, the way sleep had granted her a peace she never seemed to have while awake. Quietly, he draped a blanket over her shoulders and returned outside to finish the evening chores. The days blurred together into a rhythm Ruby had never known before. Wake before dawn, feed the chickens, collect eggs, help with whatever task Cole assigned her, mending tack, weeding the garden, hanging laundry, learning to bake bread in the temperamental oven that scorched more often than it baked. Each day brought new failures. Ruby burned 3 loaves of bread before she managed one that was merely dense instead of charred. She dropped a basket of eggs and cried for an hour while Cole silently cleaned up the mess without a word of reproach. She tried to saddle a horse and ended up tangled in the straps, hanging halfway off the animal's side while it stood patiently waiting for someone competent to finish the job. But Cole never gave up on her. He showed her how to knead the dough properly, how to judge the oven's temperature by holding her hand inside for a count of 5, how to secure a saddle so it wouldn't slip. His patience seemed endless, his corrections always practical, never cruel. "Why do you do this?" Ruby asked one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set over the valley. "Why do you keep teaching me when I fail at everything?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "You ever seen a newborn calf?" he asked finally. Ruby blinked at the apparent change of subject. "No. When they're born, they can't walk. They stumble around, fall down, struggle to stand. Looks pathetic if you don't know any better." He paused, studying his whittling. "But give them a few hours, and they're running with the herd. They're not stupid. They're just new. They just need time to figure things out." Ruby's throat tightened. "You think I'm like a newborn calf? I think you're new to this life, and I think you'll figure it out just fine if people stop telling you you're too stupid to learn." He met her eyes directly. "You're not failing, Ruby. You're learning. There's a difference." Ruby looked away, blinking hard against the tears that threatened to spill. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such simple, unvarnished belief in her ability to improve, to grow, to become something more than the burden everyone had always told her she was. "My mother said I was born wrong," Ruby whispered, the confession tearing itself from her throat. "She said I was her punishment for some sin she didn't even know she'd committed." Cole's knife stilled. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard. "Your mother was wrong, dead wrong. And if I ever hear her say otherwise, she and I are going to have words." The fierce protectiveness in his tone shocked Ruby into silence. She stared at him, at this man who barely knew her, who'd chosen her out of obligation or convenience or whatever mysterious reason had driven him to point at her in that town square. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked, the question she'd been too afraid to voice finally breaking free. The truth, Cole. Not that it was a fair trade or that you needed a wife. Why me? Cole set down his knife and the half-carved piece of wood. He was silent for so long that Ruby thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound heavy with old pain. I had a sister, he said finally. Sarah. She was soft-spoken, gentle, big-hearted, and she was heavy, like you. My father hated it, said she shamed the family. Wouldn't let her come to town with us, wouldn't let her eat at the table, treated her like she was worth less than the dogs. Ruby's breath caught. What happened to her? She married a man who promised to take her away, to give her a better life. Cole's jaw tightened. Turned out he was worse than my father, beat her, starved her, told her she was lucky he'd taken her when no one else would. Cole, she died 3 years ago. Fell down the stairs, her husband said. But I saw the bruises. I knew the truth. His hands clenched into fists, and I couldn't do anything about it because by then it was too late. She was already gone. Ruby's heart broke for him, for the sister he'd lost, for the helplessness that still haunted his eyes. So when I saw you standing there, Cole continued, his voice rough, with that whole damn town mocking you and that sheriff pointing at you like you were a joke, I saw Sarah. I saw what happened when people treat someone like they're worthless long enough that they start to believe it. He turned to look at Ruby directly, his dark eyes fierce with conviction. I chose you because you deserved better than what they were offering. I chose you because I'll be damned if I stand by and let another woman be destroyed by people too blind and cruel to see her worth. And I chose you because when I looked at you, I didn't see a burden or a joke or a punishment. I saw a person who needed someone to choose her, so I did. Ruby couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The truth of his words crashed over her like a wave, and for the first time since Cole had pointed at her in that square, she understood. This wasn't pity. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a mistake or a joke or a cruel twist of fate. This was one wounded soul recognizing another. This was a man who'd failed to save his sister trying to save someone else before it was too late. Thank you, Ruby whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you for choosing me. Cole nodded once, his throat working. Then he picked up his knife and his whittling again, and they sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. 3 weeks after Ruby arrived at the ranch, Cole declared it was time she learned to ride. Ruby protested immediately, insisting she'd fall or spook the horse or somehow cause disaster, but Cole was already leading a gentle mare named Daisy from the barn. She's older than dirt and twice as patient, Cole said, stroking the horse's nose. If anyone can teach you to ride, it's Daisy. Ruby approached nervously, her hands trembling as she touched the mare's warm neck. Daisy turned her head and regarded Ruby with large, calm eyes, then went back to munching hay, utterly unconcerned. See? She likes you already. Cole showed Ruby how to place her foot in the stirrup, how to grip the saddle horn, how to swing her leg over without kicking the poor horse. It took 3 attempts and a lot of grunting, but finally Ruby sat astride, gripping the saddle so tightly her knuckles turned white. Relax, Cole said, adjusting her feet in the stirrups. Daisy can feel your fear. If you're tense, she'll be tense. Easy for you to say, Ruby muttered. You're not the one about to fall off. Cole swung up onto his own horse, a tall gelding named Ranger, and gestured for Ruby to follow him. Just squeeze with your legs gently. She'll walk. I promise. Ruby squeezed. Daisy took a single step forward, and Ruby yelped, certain she was about to tumble off. But the horse's gait was smooth and steady, and after a few terrifying minutes, Ruby began to relax slightly. They rode slowly around the corral, Cole offering quiet instructions, correcting her posture, teaching her how to use the reins to guide the horse. Ruby made mistake after mistake, pulling too hard, leaning too far, nearly sliding off when Daisy stopped suddenly, but Daisy bore it all with saintly patience. By the end of the lesson, Ruby was sore and sweating, but grinning. I did it, she said breathlessly, as Cole helped her dismount. I actually did it. You did? Cole smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Told you could. That night, Ruby made bread that didn't burn. It wasn't perfect, The crust was too thick and the inside was still slightly dense, but it was edible. When Cole took a bite and nodded in approval, Ruby felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She was learning. She was growing. She was becoming someone new. And for the first time in her entire life, Ruby Miller began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't worthless after all. The bread that didn't burn marked a turning point Ruby couldn't quite name but felt deep in her bones. She began waking before the rooster crowed, eager to start the day's work instead of dreading it. Her hands, once soft and clumsy, grew calloused and capable. The blisters healed into tough skin that could grip an axe handle or knead dough without flinching. The ache in her muscles became familiar, even welcome, proof that her body could do more than simply exist and be mocked. Cole noticed the change but said nothing, only nodded in quiet approval when she completed tasks without needing instruction. He began giving her more responsibility, asking her to check the fences while he worked in the barn, trusting her to tend the vegetable garden without supervision, letting her make decisions about which chickens were broody and which were still laying. One morning in early autumn, nearly 6 weeks after she'd arrived, Ruby woke to find a package wrapped in brown paper sitting on the kitchen table. She emerged from the bedroom, still in her nightdress, and stared at it in confusion. "What's this?" she called toward the loft, where she could hear Cole moving around. "Open it and find out," came his voice, followed by the sound of his boots on the ladder. Ruby's hands trembled as she unwrapped the paper. Inside lay a dress, not the shapeless drab things her mother had forced her to wear, but a real dress in deep burgundy wool with brass buttons down the front and practical pockets at the hips. It was sturdy and well made, the kind of dress meant for work, but still beautiful in its simplicity. "Cole, I can't. This must have cost—" Her voice broke. "Your dresses are falling apart," Cole said, appearing at the bottom of the ladder and moving to the stove to start the coffee. "Figured you needed something better. There's 2 more in the package. Different colors." Ruby pulled them out with shaking hands, one in navy blue, another in forest green. All 3 were clearly made for a woman of her size, cut generously but not mockingly, designed to fit and flatter rather than hide and shame. When did you? "Rode into the next town over last week while you were napping, found a seamstress, gave her your measurements." Cole poured 2 cups of coffee, his tone casual as if he'd done nothing more significant than buy flour. "Figured you shouldn't have to keep wearing rags." Ruby clutched the burgundy dress to her chest, tears streaming down her face. No one had ever bought her clothing before. Not nice clothing, not clothing that fit, not clothing chosen because someone thought she deserved beautiful things. "Thank you," she whispered. "Cole, thank you." He handed her a cup of coffee, his expression unreadable. "Go try them on. Make sure they fit. If they don't, I'll take them back and have them adjusted." Ruby fled to the bedroom and changed into the burgundy dress with trembling hands. It fit perfectly, not too tight, not too loose, the fabric soft against her skin and the color rich and warm. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the ashamed, hunched creature from Birchwood. This was someone who looked like she belonged, like she mattered, like she was worth the cost of good fabric and careful stitching. When she emerged, Cole looked up from his coffee and nodded once. "Looks good. Suits you." Ruby wanted to throw her arms around him, to sob her gratitude into his shoulder, to tell him that he'd given her more than dresses, he'd given her dignity. But she sensed that Cole would be uncomfortable with such displays, so she simply said, "It's perfect. They're all perfect." "Good. Now come eat breakfast. Those chickens won't feed themselves." They fell back into their morning routine, but Ruby moved differently in her new dress, straighter, more confidently, as if the good fabric had lent her some of its strength. She caught Cole watching her once or twice throughout the day, something almost like satisfaction flickering in his dark eyes, but he never mentioned the dresses again. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ruby asked the question that had been building in her mind for weeks. "Do you ever miss having someone to talk to? I mean really talk to, not just about chores and chickens and whether it's going to rain." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I got used to silence after Sarah died. Seems safer than saying the wrong thing or hurting someone with words I couldn't take back. You don't hurt me with your words, Ruby said softly. You've never once said anything cruel to me. That's because I know what cruel words can do. Cole's jaw tightened. I watched them destroy my sister piece by piece. I won't be the kind of man who tears someone down with his tongue. Ruby drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. My mother was good at that, tearing down. She could take anything I did, any small accomplishment or moment of happiness, and find the flaw in it. Make me feel stupid for being proud. Tell me something you were proud of that she ruined, Cole said, turning to look at her. Something that deserves celebrating. Ruby's throat tightened. When I was 12, I learned to read. Not just simple words, but whole books. The school teacher said I was one of the fastest learners she'd ever seen, that I had a gift for understanding stories and remembering what I read. That's impressive. My mother said reading was useless for someone like me, that I'd never need books where I was going, which was nowhere, and that I should stop wasting time on foolishness and focus on work I could actually manage. Ruby's voice hardened with old pain. She burned the books the teacher had lent me, said they were cluttering up the house. Cole's hands clenched into fists. That woman had no right to call herself a mother. She thought she was doing me a favor, preparing me for reality, making sure I didn't get ideas above my station. Ruby laughed bitterly. She said dreams were dangerous for girls like me. Dreams are dangerous for everyone, Cole said quietly. That's what makes them worth having. Ruby looked at him, this man who'd chosen her without knowing her, who'd given her safety without demanding anything in return, who taught her that her mistakes were just part of learning instead of proof of her worthlessness. What are your dreams, Cole? She asked. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, I dream of building something good here, something lasting. A place where people don't have to pretend to be someone they're not just to be accepted. A place where kindness isn't weakness, and where people are judged by their character instead of their appearance or circumstances. He paused. I guess I dream of creating what Sarah never got to have, a home where she would have been safe and loved and valued exactly as she was. Ruby's eyes burned with tears. That's a beautiful dream. It's probably impossible, but I'm too stubborn to stop trying. It's not impossible, Ruby said fiercely. You've already started. You gave me that home. You gave me exactly what your sister needed. Cole turned to look at her fully, and in the fading light his expression was raw and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. You think so? I know so. Before I came here, I thought I was worthless. I thought the best I could hope for was to be ignored instead of mocked. But you, her voice broke. You taught me that I'm capable, that I can learn and grow and be useful, that I matter. If that's not creating a home where people are valued exactly as they are, I don't know what is. Cole looked away, but not before Ruby saw the sheen of tears in his eyes. Sarah would have liked you, he said roughly. You two would have been good friends. I wish I could have known her. Me too. Cole stood abruptly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm going to check on the horses, get some rest. Tomorrow we're going to work on your riding, time you learn to do more than walk in circles. He disappeared into the darkness, and Ruby sat alone on the porch, her heart full of an emotion she was almost afraid to name. It wasn't gratitude, though she was grateful. It wasn't obligation, though she felt indebted. It was something deeper, something that had grown slowly over weeks of shared silence and small kindnesses and the steady, unwavering belief that she was worth the effort of teaching. She was beginning to care for Cole Archer, not as an obligation or a debt to be repaid, but as a person she genuinely wanted to know, to support, to stand beside through whatever challenges lay ahead. And that terrified her more than anything her mother had ever said. The next morning, Cole saddled both horses and announced they were riding out to check the northern fence line. Ruby's stomach clenched with nervous excitement as she mounted Daisy, but this time the fear was mixed with anticipation. She was getting better at riding, more comfortable in the saddle, more confident in her ability to stay mounted even when the horse moved faster than a sedate walk. They rode out together, Cole on Ranger and Ruby on Daisy, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The morning was crisp and bright, the sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Ruby breathed in the scent of pine needles and damp earth, feeling something open up inside her chest, something light and free that she'd never experienced before. "You're doing well," Cole said, glancing back at her. Sitting straighter, moving with the horse instead of fighting her. Ruby flushed with pleasure at the praise. "Daisy makes it easy. She's very forgiving. That's because she knows you're not going to hurt her. Horses can sense fear, but they can also sense trust. She trusts you now." The idea that anything living could trust her sent a warm glow through Ruby's chest. They rode in companionable silence for another half hour, Ruby growing more comfortable with each passing mile. When they reached the northern fence line, Cole dismounted and walked along the posts, checking for damage or weak spots. Ruby stayed mounted, watching him work with quiet appreciation. He moved with such competence, such easy confidence in his own abilities. Not arrogant or showy, just quietly assured that he could handle whatever problems arose. Ruby wanted that kind of confidence, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the simple, steady belief that she could face a challenge and solve it. "Ruby, come here," Cole called, and she dismounted carefully, tying Daisy's reins to a nearby post before walking over to where Cole stood examining a section of fence. "See this?" She looked where he was pointing. Several fence posts had rotted at the base, the wood soft and crumbling, the wire sagging dangerously low. "This needs to be replaced before winter," Cole said. "Can't have the horses getting out or predators getting in? I'll ride back and get the tools and new posts. You stay here and mark any other sections that look weak." Ruby's eyes widened. "You're leaving me here alone?" "Why not? You've got Daisy, you know the way back if you need it, and you're perfectly capable of spotting rotten wood." Cole swung back up onto Ranger. "I trust you, Ruby. Time you started trusting yourself." Before she could protest further, he rode off, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the wilderness with nothing but a patient mare and a fence that needed attention. Ruby took a deep breath and turned to the task. She walked slowly along the fence line, running her hands over each post, testing for soft spots or damage. She found 3 more sections that needed repair and marked them by tying strips of cloth from her pocket around the posts. It was simple work, but doing it alone, being trusted to do it correctly without supervision, filled her with a sense of accomplishment that was almost overwhelming. When Cole returned an hour later with tools and lumber strapped to Ranger's back, he nodded approvingly at her marked posts. "Good eye. You found 2 I missed when I checked last month." They worked together to replace the damaged posts, Cole showing Ruby how to dig out the old ones, set the new posts deep enough to withstand winter frost, and string the wire tight. It was hard, exhausting work, and by the time they finished, Ruby's hands were blistered despite the calluses, and her back ached fiercely. But she'd done it. She'd helped build something that would protect the ranch, that would last through the winter and beyond. Her work mattered. Her effort had value. "You did good today," Cole said as they rode back toward the ranch, the sun sinking low behind them. "Real good. I couldn't have finished that without help." "You could have done it faster without me," Ruby said, but without the old bitterness. It was just observation, not self-flagellation. "Maybe, but it's better with company. Better when it's shared." Cole glanced at her. "I spent too many years doing everything alone, thinking that was the only way. It's not. Things are better when you have someone to share the load." Ruby's heart squeezed tight. "I'm glad I'm here, Cole. I'm glad you chose me." "I'm glad too." He said it simply, without drama or flowery language, but Ruby heard the truth in it. The honest acknowledgement that this arrangement, born of necessity and defiance, had become something neither of them expected. It had become a partnership, a friendship, maybe even the beginning of something more. That night, Ruby's hands were too sore to cook, so Cole prepared their dinner, venison stew with vegetables from the garden and bread Ruby had baked 2 days earlier. They ate together at the small table, their conversation easy and comfortable, punctuated by long silences that felt restful rather than awkward. After dinner, Cole heated water on the stove and poured it into a basin, then pulled out a small tin from the shelf above the sink. "Give me your hands," he said. Ruby hesitated, then held out her blistered palms. Cole dipped his fingers into the tin, some kind of salve that smelled of herbs and beeswax, and began gently rubbing it into her damaged skin. His touch was careful, almost tender, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he worked the salve into each blister and callus. Ruby couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process the fact that this man was tending her wounds with the same care he showed the horses, the same patience he showed everything in his life that mattered. "This'll help them heal faster," Cole said, his voice quiet. "Sarah used to make this salve, taught me the recipe before she died, said working hands deserve to be cared for properly." "It feels good," Ruby managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole finished with one hand and moved to the other, his fingers warm against her skin. "You worked hard today. Harder than you needed to. You could have complained or asked to go back early, but you didn't. You kept going until the job was done." "That's what you do," Ruby said. "You work until it's finished. I learned that from watching you." Cole looked up then, his dark eyes meeting hers across the small table. "You're stronger than you think, Ruby Miller. A lot stronger." "Ruby Archer," she corrected softly, surprising herself. "My name is Ruby Archer now." Something shifted in Cole's expression, something warm and fierce and protective. "Ruby Archer," he repeated, testing the name. "Sounds right." He finished applying the salve and set the tin aside, but his hands lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Ruby's heart hammered in her chest, and she wondered if he could feel her pulse racing beneath his fingertips. Then he released her hands and stood, moving to bank the fire for the night. "Get some rest. Your hands will feel better by morning." Ruby nodded and retreated to the bedroom, but she lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and feeling the ghost of Cole's touch on her palms. Something was changing between them, something subtle and profound that neither of them had words for yet. She was no longer just the girl Cole had saved from humiliation, and he was no longer just the man who'd chosen her out of obligation or memory or whatever complex mixture of reasons had driven him to point at her in that town square. They were becoming something else, something neither of them had planned, but both were slowly, carefully learning to accept. 2 weeks later, Cole announced they needed to ride into the next town over, not Birchwood, but Millerville, a larger settlement about 10 miles west, to buy supplies and sell some of the ranch's surplus eggs and vegetables. Ruby's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "Can't you go alone? I could stay here and watch the ranch." "I need your help carrying everything. Besides, you can't hide from people forever." Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "I'll be with you the whole time. No one's going to hurt you while I'm there." Ruby wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was fine staying hidden away on the ranch forever, but she knew Cole was right. She couldn't spend the rest of her life avoiding other people just because some of them had been cruel. They set out early on a clear, cool morning, Ruby riding Daisy with more confidence than she'd ever thought possible. Cole on Ranger with baskets of eggs and vegetables strapped behind his saddle. The ride took most of the morning, the landscape shifting from the familiar valleys and pine forests around the ranch to rolling farmland and eventually to the outskirts of Millerville. The town was larger than Birchwood, with wider streets and more buildings, a proper general store, a blacksmith, a church with a tall steeple, even a small hotel. People moved through the streets with purpose, barely glancing at Ruby and Cole as they rode in. Ruby relaxed slightly. No one here knew her. No one here had witnessed her humiliation. She was just another woman on horseback, anonymous and unremarkable. They tied the horses outside the general store, and Cole helped Ruby carry the baskets inside. The storekeeper, a middle-aged man with spectacles and a friendly smile, greeted them warmly. "Morning, folks. What can I do for you?" "Looking to sell some eggs and vegetables," Cole said, setting the baskets on the counter. "Fresh as of yesterday morning." The storekeeper examined the goods, nodding in appreciation. "These are fine quality. I'll give you fair market price for the lot." While Cole negotiated, Ruby wandered through the store, marveling at the abundance of goods, bolts of fabric in every color, tools and nails neatly organized, jars of preserves and honey gleaming on the shelves. In the back corner, she found a small section of books, their spines worn but still readable. Her heart ached. She'd had so little time to read since leaving Birchwood, too busy with chores and learning and simply surviving. But oh, how she'd missed it. The escape, the adventure, The feeling of living 100 different lives through printed words on a page. See something you like? Ruby jumped, turning to find Cole standing behind her, his arms full of supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for his rifle. Just looking, Ruby said quickly. I wasn't going to… I know we need supplies more than… Ruby. Cole shifted the supplies to one arm and pulled a book from the shelf, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, the cover faded but still beautiful. You want this? Cole, it's expensive. We can't afford… Let me worry about what we can afford. He tucked the book under his arm with the other supplies. You've been working yourself to exhaustion for weeks. You deserve something just for pleasure, not just function. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. But you don't have to… I know I don't have to. I want to. Cole's expression softened. I remember how you lit up when you talked about learning to read. How proud you were before your mother crushed it. You should have that back, that joy in words and stories. It matters. They purchased the supplies and the book, and Cole insisted on buying Ruby a piece of peppermint candy from the jar on the counter, a small, sweet indulgence that made her feel like a child being given a precious gift. As they loaded everything onto the horses, Ruby felt lighter than she had in years, the book tucked safely in her pocket, and the taste of peppermint on her tongue. But as they prepared to leave, a woman's voice called out from across the street. Cole? Cole Archer? Cole turned, his expression carefully neutral. A woman approached, pretty, slender, well-dressed in a way that made Ruby immediately conscious of her own second-hand appearance, despite the nice dresses Cole had bought her. Margaret, Cole said, his tone polite but cool. Been a while. 3 years, the woman, Margaret, said, her eyes sweeping over Cole with undisguised interest before landing on Ruby. Her expression shifted subtly, taking in Ruby's size, her plain features, the way she stood slightly behind Cole as if trying to disappear. And who's this? My wife, Cole said flatly. Ruby Archer. Margaret's eyebrows rose in poorly concealed surprise. Your wife? How wonderful. I hadn't heard you'd married. It was recent. Cole's hand moved to the small of Ruby's back, a gesture of support that Ruby felt through every nerve in her body. Ruby, this is Margaret Holloway. We knew each other years ago. Knew each other? Margaret laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. Cole, we were engaged to be married. Don't be modest. Ruby's stomach dropped. Engaged? Cole had been engaged to this beautiful, polished woman? That was a long time ago, Cole said, his voice hardening. Things changed. Yes, they certainly did. Margaret's gaze returned to Ruby, and there was something calculating in her expression. Well, congratulations on your marriage. I'm sure you'll be very happy together. The words were polite, but the tone dripped with something cruel, an implication that Ruby couldn't miss, that she was somehow a poor substitute for whatever Cole had lost when Margaret walked away. We are happy, Ruby said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Very happy. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. How lovely. Well, I won't keep you. I'm sure you have a long ride back to that ranch of yours. It must be quite isolated out there. We like the quiet, Cole said. Nice seeing you, Margaret. Take care. He guided Ruby toward the horses with a firm hand, helping her mount Daisy before swinging up onto Ranger himself. As they rode out of town, Ruby felt Margaret's gaze burning into her back, felt the weight of comparison crushing down on her shoulders. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Ruby finally found her voice. You were engaged to her, she said. Not quite a question. Cole sighed heavily. 4 years ago, before Sarah died, before everything fell apart. What happened? Margaret's family wanted her to marry someone with better prospects, someone from town, someone connected. I was just a rancher trying to build something from nothing. Cole's jaw tightened. When my father died and left me with debts and a struggling ranch, Margaret decided I wasn't worth the risk. She called off the engagement and married a banker from Denver within 6 months. I'm sorry, Ruby said softly. Don't be. If she'd married me, I would have spent my life trying to be someone I wasn't just to keep her happy. She did us both a favor by leaving. Cole glanced at Ruby. But I know what you're thinking. You're wondering why I chose you when I could have had someone like her. Ruby's throat closed. The thought crossed my mind. Ruby, look at me. She turned in the saddle, meeting his eyes. Margaret was beautiful and refined and everything people said I should want. But she was also shallow and cruel in subtle ways I didn't see until it was almost too late. She would have despised ranch life, would have hated the isolation, the hard work, the simplicity. Cole's expression was fierce. You're nothing like her. You work hard without complaint. You learn from your mistakes instead of blaming others. You care about things that matter, about animals and growing things and building something real. That's worth 100 pretty faces and polished manners. Ruby blinked back tears. You really mean that? I wouldn't say it if I didn't. Cole urged Ranger forward. Margaret saw my life as something to escape from. You see it as something worth building. That makes all the difference. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, and when they arrived at the ranch, Ruby felt something settle in her chest, something solid and unshakable. This was her home. This man was her husband, and no beautiful ghost from his past could change the fact that she belonged here, that she'd earned her place through sweat and determination and the slow, patient building of trust. That night, as Ruby sat by the fire reading her new book of sonnets while Cole repaired a broken harness across the room, she felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. She was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never been before. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would fight to protect this life they were building together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley in white, just as October surrendered to November. Ruby woke to find the world transformed, everything familiar made strange and beautiful by the blanket of frost covering the ranch. She pressed her hand against the cold window glass, watching her breath fog the pain, and felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that this was her first winter here, that she'd survived long enough to see the seasons change in this place she now called home. Cole was already up, feeding extra hay to the horses and checking that the barn was secure against the coming cold. Ruby dressed quickly in her warmest dress, the navy blue one, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before heading outside to help with the morning chores. Winter came early, Cole observed as she approached the chicken coop. We'll need to make sure the animals have enough feed stored. Could be a hard season. Ruby nodded, scattering grain for the chickens who huddled together for warmth, their feathers fluffed against the cold. What do we need to do? Chop more firewood. Check all the fences before the ground freezes solid. Make sure we've got enough supplies to last if we get snowed in for a few weeks. Cole's breath made white clouds in the morning air. It'll be hard work, but we'll manage. They spent the next week preparing for winter with an intensity that left Ruby exhausted each night. Cole taught her to swing an axe properly, how to split logs along the grain, how to stack firewood so it would stay dry under the snow. Her shoulders ached and her hands blistered again despite the calluses, but she kept working, determined to pull her weight. One afternoon, as they worked side by side splitting wood behind the barn, Ruby paused to catch her breath and watched Cole work. He moved with such fluid efficiency, each swing of the axe precise and powerful, the log splitting clean down the middle. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold, and there was something almost hypnotic about the rhythm of his movements. He caught her watching and paused, wiping his forehead. Something wrong? Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks. No, just thinking. About what? She hesitated, then decided honesty was better than evasion. About how different my life is now, how I never thought I'd be splitting firewood on a ranch, preparing for winter, working alongside someone who actually values what I contribute. Cole set down his axe and moved closer, his expression serious. You value it too, don't you? The work, I mean. Not just because I appreciate it, but because you know you're capable of it. Ruby considered this, then nodded slowly. Yes, I do. I never thought I could be strong, but I am. Not the way you're strong, but in my own way. Strength comes in different forms, Cole said. Physical strength is useful, but it's not the only kind that matters. You've got determination, resilience, the ability to keep going even when things are hard and you're scared. That's just as valuable as being able to split a cord of wood. Ruby's throat tightened with emotion. How do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. I just try to tell the truth as I see it. Cole picked up his axe again. And the truth is, you're one of the strongest people I know. You've rebuilt yourself from nothing, Ruby. That takes more courage than most people ever have to find. They returned to work, but Ruby felt lighter somehow, as if Cole's words had lifted a weight she'd been carrying without realizing it. She was strong, she was capable, and she was no longer the broken, ashamed girl who'd stood in the town square expecting to be rejected. That night, a blizzard rolled in with shocking speed. Ruby was washing the dinner dishes when the wind suddenly howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and driving snow against the house in stinging waves. She dried her hands quickly and moved to the window, watching as visibility dropped to nothing, the world beyond the glass disappearing into a wall of white. "That's a bad one," Cole said, coming to stand beside her. "Could last all night, maybe longer." "Are the animals secure?" Ruby asked, worry tightening her chest. "Everything's battened down tight. They'll be fine. We just need to wait it out." Cole moved to the fireplace and added more wood, building up the flames until the room glowed with warmth. "Might as well get comfortable. We're not going anywhere." Ruby settled into one of the armchairs with her book of sonnets while Cole worked on repairing some leather tack, the two of them existing in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. But as the hours passed and the temperature dropped, the fire's warmth couldn't quite reach the corners of the room. Ruby pulled her shawl tighter, trying not to shiver visibly. Cole noticed anyway. "You're cold." "I'm fine," Ruby insisted, but her chattering teeth betrayed her. Cole stood and disappeared into the bedroom, returning with a heavy quilt. "Come here." Ruby rose hesitantly and moved closer to the fire. Cole wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment before he stepped back. But even wrapped in the quilt, Ruby couldn't stop shivering, the cold seeming to seep into her bones. "Damn it," Cole muttered, seeing her tremble. "You're going to freeze." He made a decision, his expression determined. "Come on." "What?" "We'll both freeze if we try to sleep separately tonight. The bedroom's colder than out here and the loft's even worse." Cole sat down in the larger armchair and gestured to the space beside him. "Body heat. It's practical, not improper. I'm not going to let you get sick because we're both too stubborn to share warmth." Ruby's heart hammered. "Cole, I can't. We shouldn't." "Ruby, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate. I'm suggesting we both survive the night without losing our fingers to frostbite." His tone was firm but not unkind. "Trust me. Please." Ruby hesitated for one more moment, then moved to the chair. Cole shifted to make room, and she settled beside him, awkward and uncertain. He pulled the quilt over both of them and wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close to his side. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. Ruby went rigid at first, terrified of taking up too much space, of being too heavy against him, of doing something wrong. But Cole's arm stayed steady around her shoulders, and gradually she felt herself relax, her head coming to rest against his chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Better?" Cole asked quietly. "Yes," Ruby whispered. "Thank you." They sat together as the storm howled and the fire crackled, Ruby's shivering slowly subsiding as warmth seeped back into her body. Cole's presence was solid and reassuring, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Ruby felt something she'd been too afraid to acknowledge even to herself. She felt safe, completely, utterly safe in a way she'd never experienced before. Not just physically safe from the cold or from hunger or from mockery, but safe in some deeper, more fundamental way. Safe to be exactly who she was without pretense or apology. Safe to make mistakes and learn from them. Safe to hope for things she'd been told were impossible for someone like her. "Cole?" she said softly, afraid to break the spell but needing to speak. "Hmm? Why haven't you ever... I mean, we've been married for months now, but you've never..." She couldn't finish the sentence, heat flooding her face. Cole was silent for a long moment. "Because I didn't marry you to use you, Ruby. I married you to give you a choice, a chance at something better than what that town was offering. What happens between us, if anything ever happens, needs to be something you want, not something you feel obligated to give me because I chose you that day." Ruby's eyes burned with tears. "You really mean that?" "Every word. You're not a possession. You're a person, and you deserve to be treated like one. His arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. When and if you ever want more than this partnership we've built, you'll tell me. Until then, this is enough. More than enough. Ruby couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She'd spent her entire life being told she should be grateful for whatever scraps of kindness anyone threw her way, that she had no right to want or expect anything more. But Cole was telling her the opposite, that she had value, that her wants and needs mattered, that she deserved to be courted and chosen, not just accepted out of obligation or pity. What if I'm starting to want more? Ruby whispered, the confession terrifying and liberating all at once. Cole's breath caught. Then we'll talk about it. When you're ready. When you're sure. No rush, Ruby. We've got time. They sat together through the long night, the storm raging outside while inside the fire burned low and steady. Ruby dozed against Cole's chest, waking occasionally to find him still awake, still watching over her, still keeping her safe and warm. And each time she woke, she felt a little more certain of what was growing between them, something real and solid and worth protecting. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of snow. Cole gently woke Ruby, his voice soft in her ear. "Sun's up. We need to check on the animals." Ruby stirred, reluctant to leave the warmth and safety of his arms, but duty called. They dressed in layers and ventured out into a landscape transformed, everything pristine and untouched under the brilliant blue sky. The work was hard, shoveling paths to the barn, breaking ice in the water troughs, making sure the animals had weathered the storm safely, but they worked together with an ease born of weeks of practice, anticipating each other's needs without having to speak. As they finished the morning chores, Ruby found herself watching Cole more often, noticing small things she'd overlooked before, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he checked the horses for injuries, the patience he showed with everything from stubborn fence posts to anxious chickens to a wife who was still learning how to be capable. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Ruby kneading bread while Cole chopped vegetables for stew, she asked the question that had been building in her mind all day. "Tell me more about Sarah. What was she like?" Cole's knife paused mid-chop, then resumed its steady rhythm. "She was gentle, quieter than you, if you can believe it. She loved growing things, flowers especially. Used to fill the house with wildflowers every summer until our father made her stop, said it was a waste of time, and made the place look cluttered." "That's cruel," Ruby said softly. "That was our father, cruel without even realizing it, or maybe realizing it and not caring." Cole's jaw tightened. "Sarah used to tell me stories. She'd make them up out of nothing, grand adventures about knights and dragons and princesses who saved themselves. She said reading gave her an escape, but creating her own worlds gave her hope." Ruby's hand stilled in the dough. "She sounds wonderful." "She was, and she would have loved having you here. You remind me of her sometimes, not in appearance, but in spirit. That determination to keep going even when everything seems impossible. That refusal to let cruelty make you cruel in return." Cole set down his knife and turned to face Ruby fully. "Sarah used to say that kindness was the bravest thing a person could choose when the world gave them every reason to be bitter. You've chosen that too, Ruby. Despite everything your mother did, everything that town put you through, you're still kind, still willing to trust. That takes real strength." Ruby's vision blurred with tears. "I don't always feel strong. Sometimes I still feel like that girl standing in the square, waiting to be rejected. That girl was strong too. She stood there even though it hurt. She walked beside me through all that mockery. She didn't run or hide or break." Cole moved closer, his voice fierce with conviction. "You've always been strong, Ruby. You just didn't have anyone telling you the truth about yourself until now." Ruby set aside the bread dough and wiped her floury hands on her apron, her heart pounding with the weight of all the things she wanted to say but didn't have words for. Instead, she stepped forward and did something she'd never had the courage to do before. She wrapped her arms around Cole in a tight embrace, burying her face against his chest. Cole went still for a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her close. They stood like that for a long time, the stew bubbling on the stove and the bread dough rising on the counter, while outside the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," Ruby whispered against his shirt. "For everything. For choosing me. For teaching me. For being patient when I failed. For showing me that I'm worth more than I was told." Cole's arms tightened around her. "Thank me by believing it. By knowing your worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise again." When they finally pulled apart, both their eyes were bright with unshed tears. They returned to their cooking, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. Some new understanding reached without words. They were no longer just two people sharing a house and chores out of necessity. They were becoming partners in the truest sense. Two people building a life together, supporting each other through hard work and harder weather, finding comfort in each other's presence. That night, as Ruby lay in the bedroom and listened to Cole moving around in the loft above, she admitted to herself what she'd been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with Cole Archer. Not the desperate, grasping love born of gratitude or dependence, but something deeper and more real. Love built on respect and partnership and the slow accumulation of small kindnesses. Love that recognized his flaws, his silence that sometimes felt like distance, his stubborn independence that made asking for help difficult, his grief over Sarah that still haunted his eyes, and valued him anyway. She didn't know if Cole felt the same way. She didn't know if he ever would. But for the first time in her life, Ruby understood what it meant to love someone not because they saved her, but because they saw her as someone worth saving. The weeks that followed brought more snow, more hard work, more long evenings by the fire. Ruby's skills continued to improve. Her bread became consistently edible, then good, then genuinely delicious. Her writing improved until she could handle Daisy with confidence even in challenging terrain. She learned to mend clothes and harnesses, to judge the weather by the sky, to anticipate problems before they became disasters. But more importantly, she learned to value herself, to see her body not as something shameful but as something capable and strong, to see her face not as ugly but as simply hers, marked by character and experience, to see herself not through her mother's cruel lens or the town's mockery, but through Cole's steady belief in her worth. One evening in late November, as they sat together working on their respective tasks, Ruby mending a torn shirt, Cole oiling the saddles, a knock came at the door. They both froze, exchanging puzzled glances. They rarely received visitors, especially not after dark. Cole rose and opened the door cautiously, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle mounted above the doorframe. But the figure on the porch wasn't a threat. It was a boy, perhaps 14, shivering in the cold with snow crusting his thin jacket. "Please, sir," the boy gasped. "My ma's sick, real sick. Pa sent me to find help, said there was a ranch out this way. We're camped about 2 miles south, and ma's burning up with fever, and we don't know what to do." Cole didn't hesitate. "Ruby, get the medical kit and some blankets. I'll saddle the horses." They moved with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies while the boy warmed himself by the fire. Within 15 minutes, they were riding through the dark, following the boy back to his family's camp. Ruby's heart pounded with anxiety. She had no medical training, no idea how to help a sick woman, but Cole's calm presence beside her kept her from panicking. They found the camp in a small clearing, a single covered wagon, a sputtering fire, and a man pacing frantically while a woman lay wrapped in blankets inside the wagon, her face flushed with fever and her breathing labored. Cole examined her quickly, his expression grim. "Pneumonia, maybe, or something close to it. She needs to be kept warm and needs fluids. Ruby, can you make a broth?" Ruby's mind raced. She'd never made broth for a sick person before, but she understood the principles. "Yes, I can do that." While Cole and the man, whose name was Joseph, worked to make the woman more comfortable, Ruby built up the fire and set water to boil, adding dried herbs from Cole's medical kit and some dried vegetables she'd brought from their stores. As the broth simmered, she noticed 2 smaller children huddled together under thin blankets, their eyes huge with fear. "Are you hungry?" Ruby asked gently. The children nodded mutely. Ruby dug into their supplies and found bread and cheese, cutting generous portions and handing them to the children. They ate ravenously, and Ruby's heart ached at their obvious hunger and fear. By the time the broth was ready, the woman, Martha was her name, was awake enough to sip it slowly. Ruby held the cup to her lips, supporting her head, murmuring encouragement just as she'd seen Cole do when one of the horses was sick. "Thank you," Martha whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're very kind." Ruby's throat tightened. "It's nothing, just broth." "It's not nothing," Joseph said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been traveling for weeks trying to reach Millerville. Martha got sick 3 days ago, and I didn't know what to do. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought I might lose her." "She's not out of danger yet," Cole said honestly, "but she's got a chance now. You need to keep her warm, keep getting fluids into her, and rest here until she's strong enough to travel. Don't try to move her too soon." "We can't impose," Joseph began. "You're not imposing, you're accepting help." Cole's tone was firm. "Ruby and I will check on you tomorrow. Bring more supplies. You focus on taking care of your wife and children." They stayed for another hour, making sure Martha was stable and the children were fed and warm. As they rode back to the ranch under a sky blazing with stars, Ruby felt something settle in her chest, a sense of purpose beyond herself, beyond her own survival. "We helped them," she said quietly. "We really helped them." "We did," Cole agreed. "That's what neighbors do. What good people do. They help when they can." "Is that what we are? Good people?" Cole glanced at her, and even in the darkness she could see the warmth in his expression. "You've always been a good person, Ruby. You just needed the chance to prove it, to yourself more than anyone else." They returned to the family's camp twice more over the next week, bringing food and medicine and firewood. Martha's fever broke on the 3rd day, and by the end of the week she was sitting up and able to eat solid food. Joseph wept with gratitude, trying to offer them money they clearly didn't have, but Cole refused. "Just pass it on," he said. "Someday when you're settled and someone needs help, you remember this and you help them. That's payment enough." As they rode away for the last time, Ruby felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the winter sun. She'd helped save a woman's life. She'd fed hungry children. She'd made a difference in the world in a way that mattered. And she understood, finally, what Cole had been trying to teach her all along. Worth wasn't about being perfect or beautiful or matching some impossible standard. Worth was about what you did with the abilities you had, about showing up when people needed help, about choosing kindness even when the world had been unkind to you. That night, as they sat together by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched, comfortable in each other's presence, Ruby made a decision. "Cole," she said softly. "Hmm? Remember when you said that when I wanted more, I should tell you?" Cole went very still. "I remember." Ruby took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want more. Not because I'm grateful or because I owe you anything, but because I care about you, because I value you, because when I think about my future, I can't imagine it without you in it." She turned to face him fully, her heart hammering. "I know I'm not what you probably wanted. I know I'm not beautiful like Margaret or refined or any of the things a man like you deserves, but I'm here, and I'm real, and I love you, Cole Archer. If you'll have me, truly have me as your wife, I'm yours." Cole's eyes shone with emotion, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. "Ruby, you've been my wife since the day I chose you, but if you're asking if I love you back, if I want you, not just as a partner, but as the person I want to spend the rest of my life beside, then yes. God, yes. I love you too. I think I started loving you the first time you didn't give up, when something was hard. The first time you looked at me without fear. The first time you smiled because you were genuinely happy instead of just pretending." Ruby's vision blurred with tears. "You love me?" "I love you," Cole repeated, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "All of you. Your strength, your kindness, your determination, the way you face your fears instead of running from them, the way you care for the animals, and the way you helped Martha even though you were terrified. You're everything I didn't know I needed, Ruby. You're my home." Ruby leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was so afraid you'd regret choosing me." "Never." Cole's thumb brushed away her tears. "Not for a single moment. You're the best choice I ever made." Then, slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, Cole leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and filled with all the words they'd been too afraid to say for months. Ruby's hands came up to grip his shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "We'll take this slow, at your pace, whatever you're comfortable with." "I'm comfortable with you," Ruby whispered, "with us, with building this life together." They sat together long into the night, holding each other close, speaking in quiet voices about dreams and fears and all the things they'd been too guarded to share before. And when they finally went to their separate sleeping places, both went with lighter hearts, knowing that something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer two broken people sharing a house. They were two people choosing each other, consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of each other's flaws and strengths. They were finally and completely in love. The weeks following their confession passed in a haze of quiet joy that Ruby had never known existed. Cole moved his things down from the loft to the bedroom they now shared, and though their physical intimacy remained tentative and careful, both of them learning to trust this new closeness, the emotional intimacy deepened with every passing day. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, fears they'd never voiced to another soul. Ruby learned that Cole had wanted to be a teacher when he was young, that he loved poetry but had never told anyone for fear of being mocked, that his favorite time of day was early morning when the world was still quiet and full of possibility. Cole learned that Ruby had once dreamed of traveling to see the ocean, that she could recite entire passages from books she'd read years ago, that she hummed while she worked when she thought no one was listening. They were building something real and lasting, and for the first time in her life, Ruby believed she deserved it. But as winter deepened and December arrived, Ruby found herself thinking more and more about Birchwood, about the town that had mocked her, about her mother and sisters who'd watched her leave without a word of kindness or farewell. The thoughts weren't born of longing or nostalgia. She had no desire to return to that life, but from a growing need to face them one more time, not as the broken girl they'd rejected, but as the woman she'd become. One evening, as she and Cole sat together after dinner, she finally voiced what had been weighing on her mind. "I want to go back to Birchwood," she said quietly. Cole looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression careful. "Why?" Ruby set down her sewing and met his eyes. "Because I need to. Not for them, for me. I need to stand in that square where they mocked me and show them that their cruelty didn't destroy me, that I'm not the joke they made me out to be." "You don't need to prove anything to those people," Cole said, his voice gentle but firm. "Their opinions don't matter." "I know, but my opinion of myself matters, and I think I need to face them to finally let go of the shame I've been carrying." Ruby's hands twisted in her lap. "Does that make sense?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. "It makes sense. When do you want to go?" "Soon, before I lose my courage." Ruby took a deep breath. "Will you come with me?" "Ruby, I'll follow you anywhere. You know that." Cole set aside his work and moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "But I need you to be sure about this. Those people were cruel. They might be cruel again. Are you ready for that?" Ruby thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, ashamed, convinced of her own worthlessness. Then she thought about the woman she was now, stronger, capable, loved. The cruelty would still sting, but it wouldn't define her anymore. "I'm ready," she said. "I'm finally ready." They chose a Saturday in mid-December for their visit, reasoning that the town would be busy with weekend commerce and they'd be more likely to encounter the people who needed to see Ruby's transformation. The morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that made the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. Ruby dressed with care in the burgundy dress Cole had bought her, brushing her hair until it shone and pinning it up in a style she'd been practicing. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not the shameful burden her mother had raised, but a woman who'd earned her place in the world through hard work and determination. Cole waited for her on the porch, dressed in his good shirt and coat, his dark eyes warm with pride when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Ruby's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deflect the compliment as she once would have. "Thank you." They rode together toward Birchwood. Ruby on Daisy and Cole on Ranger, their breath-making white clouds in the cold air. As the familiar buildings came into view, Ruby felt her stomach clench with old anxiety, but Cole's steady presence beside her kept her spine straight and her chin up. The town square was indeed busy, full of people buying supplies and conducting business. Ruby recognized many faces, women who'd whispered about her, men who'd laughed at her, shopkeepers who'd overcharged her and treated her with contempt. They tied the horses near the mercantile, and as Ruby dismounted, she felt eyes turning toward her. Recognition rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Whispers started immediately. "That's the Miller girl. The one that stranger married. Looks like she's still just as fat." The words stung, but they didn't pierce the way they once had. Ruby squared her shoulders and walked beside Cole into the mercantile, keeping her head high. Inside, Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife who'd always treated Ruby with thinly veiled disgust, stood behind the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw Ruby, and her expression cycled rapidly through surprise, disdain, and something that might have been grudging acknowledgement. "Ruby Miller," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I mean, Ruby Archer. We heard you'd married." "I did," Ruby said calmly, placing her shopping list on the counter. "We need these supplies, please." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flicked to the list, then to Cole, then back to Ruby. "That's quite an order. You managing to keep house all right out there on that ranch?" Ruby heard the implied question. How has this incompetent girl not ruined everything yet? But she refused to rise to the bait. "I'm managing just fine, thank you. My bread rises perfectly now, and I can mend tack, tend livestock, and split firewood. Turns out I'm quite capable when given the chance to learn." Mrs. Henderson's lips pursed, but she began gathering the supplies without further comment. As she worked, other customers drifted closer, curiosity overcoming their pretense of minding their own business. "I heard you're living way out in the wilderness," one woman said, her tone implying this was a punishment rather than a choice. "Must be terribly lonely." "Not at all," Ruby replied, meeting the woman's eyes directly. "It's peaceful. And I have my husband's company, which I value more than any amount of idle town gossip." A man Ruby recognized as one of Jacob's friends snickered from near the door. "Bet that Cowboy's regretting his choice now, stuck with the best wife a man could ask for," Cole said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. He moved to stand beside Ruby, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. "The hardest working, most determined, kindest woman I've ever known. So, no, I don't regret my choice. Best decision I ever made was pointing at Ruby that day." The room fell silent. Ruby felt warmth spread through her chest at Cole's fierce defense, but she also felt something else. The realization that she didn't need him to defend her anymore. She could speak for herself. "My husband is right," Ruby said, her voice steady and clear. "I work hard. I'm learning every day. I'm building a life I'm proud of. And I'm happy, genuinely happy, in a way I never was when I lived here, constantly being told I was worthless." Mrs. Henderson set the wrapped supplies on the counter with more force than necessary. "That'll be $12. Cole paid, and as they gathered their purchases, the door opened and Ruby's mother swept in, Naomi and Esther trailing behind her like elegant shadows. Constance Miller stopped short when she saw Ruby, her face cycling through shock, displeasure, and something that might have been shame before settling into cold disapproval. "Ruby," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't know you were in town." "Just picking up supplies," Ruby said, proud of how steady her voice remained. "How are you, Mama?" "We're managing. Unlike some people, we've maintained our dignity and our place in this community." Constance's eyes raked over Ruby's burgundy dress, her well-fed appearance, the way she stood straight and unashamed. "I see you've gotten comfortable in your circumstances." "I have," Ruby agreed. "Very comfortable. I have a home, meaningful work, and a husband who values me. What more could I ask for?" Naomi and Esther exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of confusion and something that looked uncomfortably like envy. They'd both found suitors in recent months, Ruby had heard, but neither seemed particularly happy about their prospects. "You always were easily satisfied,"
Constance said dismissively. Low expectations for a life that was never going to amount to much anyway.
Ruby felt the old pain try to rise up, the ingrained belief that her mother's assessment was truth rather than cruelty. But then Cole's hand tightened slightly on her back, a silent reminder that she wasn't that powerless girl anymore, and Ruby found her voice. "You're wrong, Mama," she said quietly but firmly. "You were always wrong about me. I wasn't born a burden or a punishment. I was born a person with worth and potential that you were too blind or too bitter to see. You could have loved me, you could have encouraged me, but you chose cruelty instead, and that says everything about you and nothing about me." Constance's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that? After everything you what?" Ruby interrupted, her voice stronger now, fed by years of suppressed anger and pain. "After everything you did to make me feel worthless? After all the times you starved me and mocked me and told me I'd never be anything? After you hid your face in shame when Cole chose me, as if having someone want me was an embarrassment rather than a blessing?" The mercantile had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring, but Ruby didn't care anymore. This needed to be said. "I'm done carrying your shame, Mama. I'm done believing the lies you told me about myself. I'm strong and capable and worthy of love. And if you can't see that, then that's your loss, not mine." Constance's mouth worked soundlessly, her face white with fury or shock, or perhaps the dawning realization that she'd lost whatever power she'd once held over her daughter. She turned on her heel and swept out of the store, Naomi and Esther scrambling to follow. Ruby watched them go, her heart pounding but her conscience clear. She'd said what needed saying, and while it hadn't brought the closure she'd hoped for, her mother would probably never admit she was wrong. It had freed Ruby from the need for that admission. She didn't need her mother's approval anymore. She had her own. Cole squeezed her hand gently. "You ready to go?" "Not quite yet," Ruby said, surprising herself. "There's one more thing I need to do." They carried their supplies outside and loaded them onto the horses. Then Ruby turned and walked purposefully toward the center of the square, the exact spot where she'd stood 6 months ago, waiting to be chosen or rejected, convinced she knew which it would be. People noticed and began to gather, curious about what the Miller girl was doing now. Jacob Stoltzfus and his friends appeared from near the saloon, their expressions already mocking. Ruby stood in the center of the square and waited until a substantial crowd had assembled. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "6 months ago, I stood in this spot and listened while all of you mocked me. You laughed at my appearance. You mocked the man who chose me. You treated me like I was a joke, like I was less than human because I didn't meet your standards of beauty or worth." Uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Ruby pressed on. "I went home with Cole that day, convinced I'd ruined his life, convinced I was exactly what you'd always told me I was. Worthless, unlovable, a burden. But I was wrong. You were wrong. Cole didn't ruin his life by choosing me. He gave me a life. He taught me that my worth isn't determined by my size or my face or your opinions. He showed me that I'm capable of learning, of growing, of becoming strong in ways I never imagined." She turned slowly, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "You told me I couldn't dance because I was too clumsy, too heavy, too graceless. You laughed when I stumbled. You made me believe I was incapable of joy or beauty or grace." Ruby extended her hand toward Cole. "But you were wrong about that too." Cole stepped forward without hesitation, taking her hand in his. Someone in the crowd had a fiddle. There was always music in the square on Saturdays, and without being asked, the fiddler began to play a slow, sweet waltz. Cole drew Ruby close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers, and they began to dance. Ruby had never danced before in her life, but she'd practiced with Cole over the past weeks, in the privacy of their home where no one could mock her mistakes. She'd stumbled and stepped on his feet and laughed and tried again, and slowly, patiently, she'd learned. Now, in the square where she'd been humiliated, Ruby danced. She wasn't graceful like her sisters or elegant like the town's beauties, but she moved with confidence and joy, trusting Cole to guide her, trusting herself not to fail. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the girl they'd mocked transformed before their eyes. This wasn't the hunched, ashamed Ruby Miller they remembered. This was Ruby Archer, standing tall, moving with purpose, smiling with genuine happiness. When the fiddle paused, another musician joined in with a harmonica, and another townsperson began clapping in rhythm. The music swelled, and Ruby kept dancing, lost in the moment, in the joy of movement, in the freedom of not caring what anyone thought. Cole leaned close and whispered in her ear, "I would choose you again. Every single time, in every possible world, I would choose you." Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I know, and I would choose you too." When the music finally ended, Ruby and Cole stood together in the center of the square, both breathing hard, both glowing with exertion and emotion. The crowd had fallen completely silent, and then, slowly, hesitantly, someone began to clap. It was Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile, her expression grudgingly approving. Then others joined in, the applause building until most of the square was clapping. Not everyone. Constance and her daughters had disappeared. Jacob and his friends wore expressions of sullen resentment. But enough. Enough to show that Ruby's courage had changed something, had forced them to see her as a person rather than a punchline. But Ruby realized, as she stood there accepting their acknowledgement, that their approval didn't matter anymore. It was nice. She was human enough to appreciate the validation, but she no longer needed it. She'd proven to herself that she was worthy, and that was enough. "Thank you for the dance," she said to the crowd, her voice carrying clearly. "But we should be getting home. We have a ranch to run and a life to live, and we've wasted enough time caring what people who don't matter think about us." She took Cole's hand and they walked together toward their horses, unhurried and unbowed. Behind them, the crowd dispersed, returning to their business, their gossip, their small lives. But Ruby didn't look back. She'd said what she needed to say, done what she needed to do. The chapter of her life that belonged to Birchwood was closed. As they rode out of town, Ruby felt lighter than she had in months, as if she'd been carrying a heavy pack and had finally set it down. The shame was gone. The need for approval was gone. All that remained was the truth. She was strong, she was loved, and she was free. "How do you feel?" Cole asked as Birchwood disappeared behind them. Ruby considered the question, taking inventory of her emotions. "I feel complete. Like I was carrying around this unfinished story, and now it has an ending. Not a perfect ending, but a real one." "No regrets?" "Not a single one." Ruby smiled at him. This man who'd seen her worth when no one else had, who'd given her the space and safety to become who she was meant to be. "Well, maybe one small regret." Cole's eyebrows rose. "What's that?" "That I didn't have the courage to tell my mother off years ago. Would have saved a lot of pain." Cole laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You told her off today. That counts." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the winter sun warm on their faces despite the cold air. Ruby found herself thinking about the future, about the ranch they were building, about the possibility of children someday, about growing old beside this man who'd changed her life in ways she was still discovering. "Cole?" she said as their home came into view in the distance. "Thank you for everything, for choosing me, for teaching me, for loving me, for showing me that I was worth saving." Cole reined Ranger to a stop and waited for Ruby to do the same with Daisy. Then he leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her gently. "You saved yourself, Ruby," he said when they pulled apart. "I just gave you the space to do it. Everything you've become, that was all you. Your courage, your determination, your refusal to let cruelty make you bitter. That's all you." Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, clean tears, the kind that washed away old pain rather than adding to it. "I couldn't have done it without you. Maybe, but I couldn't have become the man I needed to be without you either." Cole's expression was soft, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. "You taught me that it's not too late to build something good, that past failures don't determine future worth, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. We saved each other, Ruby. That's what makes it real." They rode the rest of the way home hand in hand, their horses walking so close their legs brushed with every step. When they reached the ranch, they worked together to unsaddle and brush down the horses, to store the supplies, to complete all the small tasks that made up their shared life. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Ruby realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the dramatic storybook version with grand gestures and perfect moments, but the quiet, sustainable kind built on shared work and mutual respect and the deep knowledge that you're valued exactly as you are. "I was thinking," Cole said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe come spring, we should think about expanding, building another room onto the house, maybe a proper study where you could keep your books, where you'd have space to read and write if you wanted." Ruby's heart swelled. "You'd do that? Build me a study?" "Ruby, I'd build you a castle if you wanted one, but I figure a study is more practical and you'd actually use it." He squeezed her hand. "You've got a mind that deserves to be fed, thoughts that deserve to be recorded. Sarah never got to have that. A space that was hers, where she could think and dream and create. But you can, and I want to give that to you." Ruby couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply nodded and leaned her head against Cole's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the absolute certainty that she was home. Not home in the sense of a building or a place, but home in the sense of belonging, of being known and accepted, of having found the person whose existence made her own existence richer and fuller and more meaningful. "I love you," she whispered, "more than I have words for." "I love you too," Cole replied, his lips brushing her hair. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, neither needing to speak, both content in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious, a love built not on appearance or circumstance, but on the bedrock of respect and partnership and the choice, made daily, to see each other's worth. Ruby Miller had spent the first 20 years of her life being told she was worthless, being treated as less than human, being crushed beneath the weight of other people's cruelty. But Ruby Archer, the woman she'd become, knew the truth. She was strong, she was capable, she was loved, and no amount of mockery or judgment or cruelty could ever take that away from her again. The girl no one wanted had become the woman who knew her worth. The joke had become the victory. The burden had become the blessing. And in a small ranch house in a quiet valley far from the town that had rejected her, Ruby Archer lived the rest of her days exactly as she chose, freely, fully, and utterly without shame. She danced whenever she pleased, loved without reservation, and taught her children, when they came, that worth isn't measured by appearance or others' opinions, but by the content of one's character and the courage to keep going when everything seems impossible. She never returned to Birchwood again. She never needed to, because Ruby Archer had found something far more valuable than revenge or approval or vindication. She'd found peace. She'd found love. She'd found herself. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was the only happy ending that truly mattered. The story of the girl who was chosen when she expected rejection, who learned to be strong when she'd been told she was weak, who found love in the most unexpected place. That story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about healing, about two broken people finding wholeness in each other. And it was, from beginning to end, absolutely true. Not true in the sense of historical fact, perhaps, but true in the way that all the best stories are true, revealing something essential about courage and worth and the human capacity for growth and change. Ruby's story ended not with drama or grand gestures, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future full of possibility. She was no longer the girl no one wanted. She was the woman everyone should have seen all along, strong, capable, worthy, and utterly, completely, beautifully free.